The cafe was small, but it had a charm that made it feel like home to everyone who walked through its doors. The kind of place where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the soft hum of conversations blended together in perfect harmony. Its worn wooden floors and mismatched chairs gave it an air of comfort, like a safe place where you could just unwind after a long day. People came in for the coffee, of course, but it was the atmosphere, the warm, inviting energy that kept them coming back. On any given day, the cafe was filled with a mix of regulars and newcomers. There were students typing away on their laptops, couples lost in quiet conversation, and people who just needed a little peace. In the corner by the window there sat an old piano. It wasn't the type of instrument you'd expect to find in a place like this, but it had its own story to tell. The piano was scratched and chipped in places, but still it had a certain elegance about it. It almost felt like the piano had seen the world, witnessed countless moments of joy and sorrow, but more often than not it just sat there, quiet and still, waiting for someone to play. And that's where she came in. For the past 2 years, the young woman had worked at the cafe as a waitress. She had gotten to know most of the regulars and knew exactly what kind of coffee everyone preferred, what pastries they liked, and even which seats they usually occupied. She was always quick with a smile and an even quicker response whenever someone needed something. Her colleagues admired how effortlessly she moved through the crowded tables, balancing trays of drinks and food without ever dropping a single item. But despite how friendly and approachable she was, there was something about her that always seemed a little distant. It was almost as though she carried a secret that nobody knew about. Her hands, for example, were delicate and nimble, always gliding from one task to another with a quiet grace. But if you ever caught a glimpse of her fingers as they quickly arranged plates or wiped down tables, you might notice that they had a certain softness to them, almost like they were used to something other than carrying trays. The truth was, she had a talent, a hidden gift. She was a pianist, not just any pianist, but someone who had the ability to play with such emotion that it could leave you breathless. Music was her escape, her way of expressing things she couldn't put into words. It was her dream to perform on a stage, to share her music with the world, but life had led her down a different path. She couldn't afford to chase a dream that felt so far out of reach, so instead she worked at the cafe, earning just enough to get by. Every time she walked past that old piano in the corner, she felt a pang of longing. She would sometimes imagine herself sitting at the keys, playing a piece that would fill the room with beauty and emotion, but then reality would hit. She couldn't risk making a fool of herself. What if people didn't like her music? What if they thought she was just another waitress trying to be something she wasn't? So she kept her secret locked away, playing only for herself when the cafe was empty, when no one was watching. But on this particular evening, something was different. The cafe was buzzing with activity, and the owner was rushing around, his face slightly panicked. There was a scheduled performance for the night, a local band that had been booked for weeks, but things weren't going as planned. The band had called in last minute to cancel, citing a sudden emergency. The owner, desperate to salvage the night, tried calling other musicians, but everyone was either unavailable or already booked. He was starting to feel the pressure as customers began to trickle in, unaware of the chaos happening behind the scenes. A few minutes passed before the owner realized that he might have no choice but to cancel the live music altogether. As he paced back and forth, mumbling to himself, the young woman overheard the conversation. She was wiping down a table nearby, and when she heard the words, "no music," she hesitated for a moment. She had always avoided the piano, always made sure it stayed untouched, but in that moment something shifted inside her. The cafe needed something, anything to salvage the night, and the piano was just sitting there, waiting. Without thinking too much about it, she walked over to the owner, who was still frantically trying to make phone calls. "I can play," she said, her voice soft but steady. The owner stopped and looked at her, his expression unreadable. He didn't expect anyone to step in, especially not one of the waitresses. "You can play the piano?" he asked, clearly surprised. She nodded. I used to play a lot when I was younger." The owner wasn't convinced. He was tired, stressed, and he really didn't have the energy to argue. "Well, we don't have much of a choice, but if you want to give it a try, go ahead. Just don't expect it to be a full concert or anything." She smiled at the comment, though she could hear the doubt in his voice. "I'll keep it simple. You won't be disappointed." With that, she turned and made her way toward the piano, As her fingers brushed against the keys for the first time in years, a wave of nervousness swept over her. It was as if the piano was whispering to her, reminding her of all the years she had spent away from it. She sat down slowly, glancing over her shoulder to see if anyone had noticed. The cafe was still bustling with activity, and the hum of conversation was like background noise to her thoughts. She took a deep breath, letting the familiar feeling of the piano's cool keys settle beneath her fingers. It felt strange at first, almost foreign, but as soon as she pressed the first note, everything else seemed to fall away. Her fingers moved instinctively, like they knew what to do. The first few chords were tentative, unsure, but soon enough, the melody began to take shape. It was a piece she had played countless times in the past, one that always made her feel something deep inside. It was calm, soothing, almost like a gentle lullaby, and as she played, she felt the weight of the world lift off her shoulders. The cafe faded into the background as the music filled her mind, her heart, and the entire room. At first, only a few people seemed to notice. A couple at the corner table looked up, their conversation slowing down. Then slowly, one by one, heads began to turn. The sound of her playing wasn't loud, but it had a way of drawing people in. It was as though the room itself was holding its breath, but she didn't look up. She couldn't. She focused only on the music, her hands moving effortlessly over the keys. For the first time in a long time, she felt alive. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The more she played, the more the cafe grew quiet. The chattering and clinking of cups and saucers faded away, replaced by the soft, delicate notes floating through the air. People who had been deep in conversation stopped talking. Those who had been scrolling on their phones looked up, captivated by the unexpected sound filling the space. Even the staff, usually busy with their own tasks, paused for a moment to listen. She didn't notice how the atmosphere had changed. To her, the music was all that mattered. It was as if the piano was telling its own story, and she was simply the vessel through which it came to life. She had no idea that this simple act, sitting at the piano, playing the notes she had long kept to herself, would change everything. The soft flowing melody continued to fill the room. The longer she played, the more the cafe transformed. What started as a simple background noise, a gentle hum amidst the usual cafe sounds, grew into something almost magical. People who had been lost in their own worlds, buried in their phones or chatting with friends, suddenly found themselves turning toward the source of the music. The rhythmic tapping of the piano keys, the steady rise and fall of the notes, seemed to pull everyone's attention like a magnet. At first, the customers weren't sure what to make of it. They were caught off guard, unsure whether they should continue their conversations or just listen. But little by little, the cafe grew quieter. Conversation slowed to a halt as more and more people became aware of the beautiful music drifting through the air. The sound of a spoon clinking against a cup or a chair scraping against the floor became almost distant, like the cafe itself had paused to take in the performance. Her hands, though trembling at first, grew more confident as the minutes passed. The music seemed to take on a life of its own, flowing from her fingers like it had always been there, waiting to escape. She didn't look up, didn't check the faces of the people in the room. It was as if for that brief moment there was only her and the music, everything else blurred into the background. The cafe was quiet now, only the soft hum of the piano filling the space. A couple sitting near the window exchanged a surprised glance as the melody deepened, becoming richer, more layered with emotion. They had no idea that the waitress who had just served them their coffee was the one behind this hauntingly beautiful sound. Others, too, were mesmerized. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others, wide-eyed, couldn't quite believe what they were hearing. The young woman playing didn't notice, nor would she have cared. The music, as simple as it seemed, was her heart speaking. She played as though there was nothing left to lose, pouring every ounce of her emotion into the keys. There was a rawness to the way her fingers moved, a truth that was both personal and universal. She wasn't just playing for herself. She was playing for anyone who needed to hear it, anyone who had ever felt alone or overwhelmed. Minutes passed, though it felt like time had slowed. The cafe, a place where people usually came to enjoy a quiet cup of coffee or catch up with friends, had become a sanctuary of sorts. There was an almost reverent silence as the music swelled, wrapping itself around the people in the room. The waitstaff, too, had stopped what they were doing. The young woman's colleagues, who had seen her every day, serving drinks and carrying trays, stood in the back, watching in awe as the girl they had always known as just a waitress turned into someone else entirely. One of the other staff members, who had always thought of her as quiet and unremarkable, felt his breath catch in his chest. He had no idea she could play like this. He didn't even know she could play at all. The music was so pure, so full of emotion, it almost felt like an intimate secret shared with the room. He found himself caught up in it, not daring to move, not wanting to break the spell. The minutes dragged on, but the song never faltered. It had become something more than just notes on a page. It was an invitation to listen, to feel, and to connect. The kind of music that made you forget about the world outside, the kind that transported you into a different place where everything else didn't matter. The younger couple sitting by the wall turned to each other, both silently acknowledging how moved they were. The woman was trying to hold back tears, something about the music striking a chord in her heart. She didn't know why. It wasn't a sad song, but there was something deeply emotional about it, something that felt like it was speaking to a part of her she hadn't known was there. A man in the back of the room, who had been reading a book, found himself staring at the piano. He wasn't the type to notice details like this, but there was something about the way the music drew him in that made him sit up straight. He glanced around the room, wondering if anyone else had the same reaction. He wasn't sure how, but the music seemed to cut through the normal chatter of his day and reach him in a way nothing else had. He hadn't realized how badly he needed a moment like this. Something pure, something beautiful, something unplanned, but just as quickly as the music had filled the space, it stopped. The last note lingered in the air for a long moment, hanging like a soft sigh before it faded into nothing. The cafe was completely still. For a brief second, nobody moved, nobody said anything. It was as though the world had collectively held its breath. Then, almost as if a switch had been flipped, the silence was broken by the sound of applause. At first it was slow, hesitant. A few people clapped, unsure if they were the only ones doing it, but then more joined in. The sound of clapping grew louder, filling the room with the energy of appreciation. The young woman who had been so lost in the music didn't know what to do. She hadn't expected anything like this. Her heart was racing, her hand still resting on the keys. She had only been playing because she felt the need to express something, but now the entire cafe was applauding her. She couldn't help but feel a wave of heat rise to her cheeks. She stood up slowly, almost as if she were in a daze. The applause continued, and people were calling out words of praise. Some were shouting, "That was beautiful." Others said, "You're amazing." The owner, who had been standing behind the counter in disbelief, was clapping the loudest. He had never imagined this. In fact, he had almost written off the idea when she had first suggested it, but now he was regretting not having believed in her sooner. She looked around the room, wide-eyed, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt a strange mix of joy and embarrassment, unsure of how to respond. She hadn't expected anyone to notice her playing, let alone give her a standing ovation. But there they were, the same people who had been sipping their coffee just moments ago, now on their feet, applauding her as if she were a concert pianist. The cafe had transformed into something else entirely. It was no longer just a cafe. It was a place where something extraordinary had happened, where an unexpected performance had changed everything. For the people in that room, it was an experience they would never forget. They had walked into a regular day, expecting nothing more than their usual cup of coffee, and instead they had witnessed a hidden talent. Something real and raw, something human. The applause slowly faded, but the feeling in the air didn't. The young woman, still processing what had just happened, smiled shyly and took a small bow. Her cheeks flushed. The owner stepped forward, clapping his hands together, still in awe. "That was incredible," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "I think we need to do this more often. You have to come back and play again, maybe even make it a regular thing." She was speechless. Part of her wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, but another part of her couldn't believe what she was hearing. For the first time in a long time, she realized that her dream of playing music, of sharing her talent, wasn't as far-fetched as she had once thought. Maybe, just maybe, this was the sign she needed to start believing in herself again. As the room began to settle back into its usual rhythm, the young woman stood by the piano, still processing the unexpected turn her day had taken. She hadn't just played music. She had shared a piece of herself. And for the first time, she wondered if this was the start of something much bigger than she had ever imagined.